This is the Blaisin Access Podcast, amplifying disability perspective one story at a time. Today is Wednesday, March 12th. I'm Blaise Bryant. Shout out to my good friend Kara Leibowitz, who got 3 out of 3 on our cerebral palsy awareness trivia segment. If you missed it, well, just go back an episode in your feed and you'll be able to hear our chat, which was a bit of catching up from our independent living days and, of course, playing some trivia. So today I wanted to bring you a piece that I put together on subminimum wage for people with disabilities. In New York, there is a bill to get rid of subminimum wage for people with disabilities. There was a press conference last Monday, March 3rd, and this is what I put together for Hudson Mohawk Magazine, which graciously airs the trivia segments and other disability-related segments that I do. Since 1938, people with disabilities have been able to be paid less than minimum wage. That's when Section 14C was introduced, allowing this discriminatory practice. Fast forward 87 years. New York is trying to join about a dozen states who outlawed some minimum wage. Assemblyman Phil Steck represents part of New York's capital region. Senator James Skoufis's district is made up of cities, towns, and suburbs north of New York City. Steck and Skoufis are leading the legislative charge ending subminimum wage in New York. They held a joint press conference on March 3rd about the issue. Steck referenced his experience as being the former chair of the Assembly's Task Force for People with Disabilities.
I want to begin with a quote from Franklin Roosevelt, my favorite president, and he once said, "If you can't afford to pay your workers a living wage, maybe you shouldn't be in business." And when Roosevelt said a lot of things we do well to remember today, but I was chair of the Task Force on People with Disabilities before the disabilities became a full committee, now chaired by Angelo Santa Barbara, who's a co-sponsor of the bill to eliminate the minimum wage for people with disabilities. And I did some tours of facilities which employed people with disabilities. And in some instances, you saw some really great things. You saw people who were very skilled, getting paid a good wage to do skilled labor. And then you also saw some things that were really exploitative. I remember one person in particular who was sitting there just moving pegs around a board all day for less than minimum wage.
Steck also talked about some programs in the capital region who are moving the needle.
There are tremendous programs today for people with disabilities, like Living Resources, which I know Angelo Santa Barbara's son has been in that program. They have art, they have music, they have sports, they also have employment, but not of the kind that I described. So we introduced this bill with the support of a number of advocates to eliminate the subminimum wage for people with disabilities, which has also been federal policy for some time. And actually this year, I'm quite optimistic that it will pass. I think there's a good movement, and my sense from leadership is that it will be supported.
Assemblyman Angelo Santa Barbara, who also represents part of New York's capital region, has a son Michael with autism. When Skoufis was in the Assembly, he also chaired the former task force for people with disabilities.
This sub-minimum wage is inhumane in many cases. It's disgraceful, and it's time that we finally fixed it. It's a product of a provision in the Fair Labor Standards Act at the federal level. There are over 10 states, as you can see over there, that have affirmatively taken the step to do away with this sub-minimum wage that the federal government has created an opportunity for, and New York should be the 12th when we pass it this year. Whether you are a teenager working at McDonald's, you're getting paid the full minimum wage. Whether you are a migrant farm worker on a visa, you're getting paid at least the minimum wage here in New York State. But for some unacceptable reason, people with disabilities are, many of them, almost 1,500 of them, are being paid pennies on the dollar.
John Robinson is the founder and CEO of Our Ability, based in Albany. He helps link people with disabilities to jobs.
In New York, there are 2.4, 2.5 million individuals with disabilities in our state. There are 41% of us, or about 400,000 individuals that work in New York State. And in most cases, it's above minimum wage. And yet, you can see on the sign, there's still 1,400 plus individuals with disabilities in New York State that are on subminimum wage contracts. It's been my advocacy to build employment for individuals with disabilities with what we do with Our Ability. We build job opportunities in corporate America and nonprofits throughout the state, throughout the country for individuals with disabilities. And we do that because I believe in opportunity and equity with individuals with disabilities. And yet when I see the 1,400 number, I realize that we're still not exactly where we need to be.
If the law doesn't pass in New York this year, Robinson is very concerned about the impact of doing nothing.
We are on the precipice of going backwards in our country for the rights of individuals with disabilities. And New York State, the Empire State, could be a beacon of hope for individuals with disabilities, not only statewide, but nationally. It concerns me that that 1,400 number, if this law is not passed, could increase in the next year to 2,800, to 5,000, to 10,000, because that's the nature of where we're going in our country. Or we could be a beacon of hope in New York State and pass this law and eliminate the 1,400 down to zero and start paying all individuals with disabilities an equitable wage for the work that they do. The wage that I've earned over the years has allowed me to get married, to have a family, to buy products and services, to own a house, and to pay taxes. And that matters to me. I ultimately want to be seen as the equal of others, and that's what my employment allows me to do.
Max Rodriguez is the manager of government affairs with the Center for Disability Rights in Rochester. They are an independent living center who helps people with disabilities find jobs.
It's overdue that New York joins more than the dozen other states that have done away with this outdated and harmful practice. The idea that individuals with disabilities can and should be paid less than minimum wage is wrong. This practice stems from deep-rooted structural biases against people with disabilities. Disabled workers need to be paid the same as non-disabled workers. Additionally, there needs to be increased training and workforce opportunities for New Yorkers with disabilities. Individuals with disabilities have more difficulties achieving financial independence. Without being able to work and earn even a modest pay, it makes it more difficult for disabled New Yorkers to be able to live independently. So here are calls on the rest of the legislature and the governor to help bring New York into the 21st century by finally ending this practice of paying subminimum wage to disabled workers.
Independent living centers are not housing for people with disabilities. They are led by and for people with disabilities, helping them get linked to programs and services to live an independent life on their terms. Alex Thompson is the Director of Advocacy for the New York Association on Independent Living. The association is made up of 42 independent living centers throughout the state. Thompson explains how people with disabilities get trapped in subminimum wage jobs.
One of the things that's really discouraging with subminimum wage is that people kind of get filtered into these workshops based on low expectations of what they can do and what they can achieve. And that's based on, the federal law that was mentioned that Senator Skoufis mentioned from 1938. So we are, way behind in terms of, the progress that we need to make on disability employment. As Assemblymember Steck had mentioned, there are services to, meet people's individual needs. There's technology now that we can use, so people can do jobs that, back in the 1930s, it was unimaginable that people would have computers, assistive technology. There's so much available to people with disabilities, and to say that we should be, judging people's ability on how many, pegs they can put in a board or how many envelopes they can stuff is just, It's antiquated. It's 1930s thinking, and we need 2025 thinking. We need to pass this bill this year. Thank you.
Section 14C of the federal labor law was signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had polio. This is Blaise Bryant reporting for Hudson Mohawk Magazine. That was my piece for Hudson Mohawk Magazine covering the press conference on subminimum wage for people with disabilities, which I have to say, when I was putting it together, I really was geeking out a little bit because I did so much of packaging stories like this when I was in college, and it just brought that back for me. And I love doing journalistic stuff like this because it's just fun to really go through, select what's being said, and grab from it. And I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to attend the press conference, which I was going to just alone in my capacity as the communications specialist with the New York Association on Independent Living, because our director of advocacy, Alex Thompson, was speaking, and others as well. John Robinson, a dear friend of mine for 15 plus years, Max Rodriguez, manager of government affairs with the Center for Disability Rights. We've been friends now for a couple of years. I've known Assemblyman Phil Steck, who used to be my assemblyman when I lived on the other side of the Hudson River, and Senator Skoufis. I know him a little bit as well. So it was really good to be there and hear the work that is being done on ending subminimum wage for people with disabilities in New York. I want to know what stood out to you from the piece. Let me know on Facebook at Blaisin Shows. That's BLAISIN Shows. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe, and share the Blaisin Access podcast. It's a good free way to help it grow. Transcripts, they are AI generated and are not perfect, but they will give you a baseline sense as to what I'm talking about here on the show. A couple hours from now in your podcast feed, you will hear a couple of blasts from the past from my college days. Wow, when I sounded young and really didn't know how the hell to interview. You'll hear me then, and you're hearing me now. And you can say to yourself, wow, he's really come a long way. That's coming up on Blaisin Access Weekly. On tomorrow's daily show, we're going to go back to the Capitol crawl from 1990, when people with disabilities climbed out of wheelchairs and started crawling up the Capitol steps in hopes of getting the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. I'm Blaise Bryant. Thank you for listening to the Blaisin Access podcast, amplifying disability perspective one story at a time. Have a great day.